We are now on Daf Ayin Ches, and we're up to Amar Rabbi Yehuda. And let's just see if we could find the place. It's about halfway down the Amud, and the first word in the line is mitpachas, and I'll take a minute to guarantee that everybody has the place. Again, it's not one of those easy kind of, I can point to the place. So take a look. It's about, the Amud starts with thinner lines and then goes to the wider lines. And the wider lines is probably about line 15 to 20. If you could just let me know if you have the place. Yeah, you have it. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Now, we're talking about the Iser of Rechitza on Yom Kippur. And what we're discussing specifically is the case where he is holding on to cold fruits that have a certain kind of hitztanenus, which means that on a very hot day, Yom Kippur, very often here in Eretz Yisrael, for example, is very hot. It's true in many places of the world. And he wants to cool his body off by rubbing these cold fruit on his body. And the question is, does that constitute a violation of Inu? He is now involved in Tainug that undermines Inu. Says Rabbi Yehuda Mutter. This is a method in which you can avoid Rechitza, but perhaps accomplish the same goal as Rechitza. Now, again, Rechitza could be for many reasons, but if you're only washing your body because you have filth on your body, we said that that's not antithetical to Tainug. I mean to say to Inu. It's not a Rechitza Shel Tainug. But classic Rechitza Shel Tainug would be where he enjoys the temperature of the water. He goes into a hot bath on a cold day in the winter. He goes into a cold, cooling off bath or shower on a hot day. And that's Rechitza, that's Tainug. And you and I might have said that enjoying the coldness of the fruit, let's say he washes his face with it, that would be Rechitza. He cools off on a hot day. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda, says, no. We need what's called a Ma'aser Ritzicha. I'm sorry, a Ma'aser Rechitza. And he doesn't have a Ma'aser Rechitza. This does not constitute a Ma'aser Rechitza. In fact, the Gemara now is going to tell a couple of stories about Amoraim who actually used this method to cool off their bodies. Rabbi Yehuda Yemitztanin Bikara. Kara is a kind of a gourd. In modern Hebrew, it's called a dalas. And Rabbi Mitztanin Biyanuka. The child, apparently, I never noticed this, a baby has a lower body temperature than an adult. Or maybe the child was sleeping in a cold room and the outside skin of the body was cold. And now he rubs his body against the body of a child and he cools off. Rava mitztanin because of the kaspa. Silver, or for that matter, any metal, has a colder feeling than a piece of wood. So he cools off with a kos of kesef, a silver goblet. Now, all this is paskind in Orach Chaim Siman Tov Reish Yud Gimel. And the Rashash quotes another interpretation of the Mitztanin Biyanuka, and he says that the word Yanuka could refer to what's called Roshe Unikios of an Anaf Shel Eitz. Apparently, there's a part of the tree, specifically the branch of the tree, which is yonik. It absorbs nourishment in a kind of a nursing situation. So the word Yanuka might refer to that kind of a branch of a tree. Okay. Now we have an insight of the Siach Yitzchak, and he says, Ein machlokas bein hamoroim. In other words, don't think that each one of these Amorim rejected the other heter of the other Amorah. Each one had his own way, his own method of cooling himself off. Kol echad es darko litztanen b'dover acher. Fine. Now, I'll just mention that there's something here in the Siach Yitzchak which is out of the radar screen. I don't think it can be true, in my humble opinion. He wants to say that Rabbi Yehuda having mitztanen bekara, that's l'shitasa, because kara is a vegetable, and Rabbi Yehuda just said that mutal mitztanen bepero. So food, whether it's cold fruits or cold vegetables, can be used, and we could be lenient to cool off on Shabbos. And what that means is that even though the fruits or the vegetables are moist, and that's why they're cold, people have a general tendency of cooling off with that kind of a cold fruit. And the Siach Yitzchak builds his case on the Rambam in Perek Gimel Ches Asur. The Rambam, when he quotes this Gemara, he only mentions peros, mutal litztanen beperos. And the chiddush of peros is that even though they are lach, they are moist, which makes it very similar to rechitza, nevertheless it's mutal. And Rava and Rava are they're expanding the scope of this heter to include even that which is not edible. For example, a child, or a piece of wood, or in Rava's case, a silver goblet. What would the Rambam say in those cases? Now, to try to explain this Siach Yitzchak, which again, I think it's honestly, I have a feeling the Rambam is giving me a kal v'chomer, that if you're allowed to cool off on Yom Kippur with peros, how much more so you could use a silver goblet or the body of a tino. The chiddush of peros is that even though they're moist, which is very similar, as we said before, to rechitza. But if we want to be seduced by the logic of the Siach Yitzchak, then perhaps we could say the following, and this is a methodological rule that I would like to apply all over Shas, in all of Halacha. When there is an exception to the rule, let's say, for example, you have a rule of Isur, and the Rabbanan want to create a heter, then they're going to apply that heter within a certain framework. It's not going to just be, well, let's see where the logic is compelling and convincing. That's not the way it works. The way Chazal operate, if they want to come up with a heter, it's got to be a rule, it's got to be objective, it's got to be well defined, and it's not that every single scenario I'm going to use my intuitive logic. In the case of cooling off the body on Yom Kippur, and whether that's an act of tainug similar to rechitza, the Chazal created a heter, says Rabbi Yehuda, and the Siach Yitzchak in interpreting Rabbi Yehuda based on the Rambam. There's a certain rule, a principle that's been formulated as to when this leniency will apply. And the rule is called regilus. What that means is that we're going to look for something, the Rabbanan, to be maktir that's ragil. We're not going to stretch our arm out and come up with recommendations and leniencies in some sort of unusual scenario. We're not going to say, well, roll your body over a baby, or, just, instead of using a roll-on, use a metal goblet on. Those are unusual. That's not regilus. But it's regilus to take peros, because they have that moisture to them, and use them on a hot day to cool off the body. Like today, we'd be more prone to use, let's say you soaked a cloth, a rag of some sort in water, and the water is cold water. And then you wipe it across your forehead and you cool off, or wipe it on your chest. Certain ways that people, behavior that is accepted in a certain society. And it seems that it was quite regular. If you're desperate to cool off, they didn't have air conditioning. So you used a fruit or a vegetable that has moisture and it's going to cool off your body. That was the leniency, and that was the rule that they established. But something that's not ragil, that wasn't included in this leniency. Rav Papa says, Kasa de Kaspa, Mole Asur Chaser Shar. That even though, in principle, as we've established through the minhag, the behavior of Rava, you're allowed on Yom Kippur to cool yourself off with a silver goblet, but nevertheless, if it's full, if it has liquids in it, then it's awesome. We're always afraid that if you're taking a utensil, a receptacle that has liquid in it, that some of that liquid is going to pour off and spill onto your body as you use it and apply it to your body. And that is mamish rechitza on Yom Kippur. So we will not allow cooling off with a full goblet. But shari, in the case of chaser, which is not full to the top, we're not going to be choshesh that maybe some of the liquids inside the cup will spill over his body. Fine. Now we have something called pachra. Now, pachra is already earthenware or pottery that has liquids absorbed inside its porous nature. In fact, in kashrus laws, once you use pottery over a hot fire for nevelos or treifas, you cannot kasher the pot. It's made of porous earthenware, and the tam and the let's say the liquid element that was absorbed in the kli is still in the kli. And if you cook again with it, you can end up with that liquid being polate, and you're getting literally the time of nevela into your food. If we apply those same yardsticks to Yom Kippurim, then in the case of a receptacle that's made of porous earthenware, then we have to assume that even if on the outside it looks like it's dry, but the liquids that are inside that are absorbed in deep down into the pores, those liquids will come to the fore, so to speak. And he's now cooling himself off, mishum de mishchal shachit. He's cooling himself off with the liquids that are absorbed in the walls of this earthenware kli. And if he's going to use this kli to cool his body off, then basically this contact between the mayim that's absorbed in the kli and his body. And that makes it into a quasi kind of rechitza. Let me just see if he adds anything here. I don't think there was a note on this. He says the liquid seeps through the sides of the cup. Again, this is similar to what we discussed in the last piece of Gemara here about Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who says that you're not allowed to sit on mud on Yom Kippur because it's tofeach al menaslat piach. So it moistens your body if you sit on mud. That was the problem. Here also, it's going to moisten your body because it's mishchal shachil. Then we have Rav Ashi, Amakasa de Kaspa, Chaser Namios. Mishum de Mizdorev. So until now, we've been assuming that unless the vessel, the receptacle, is full to the top with liquids, in which case we have to worry that it might spill. But if it's not filled to the top, we don't have to worry that it might spill. But here, in the case of a silver goblet, even if it's not filled to the top, we have to worry about something called mizdore. Now, in the Hebrew translation, he says that mizdorev means machliku v'nofel minayat. The nature of a silver goblet is such that it's very smooth. You know, you really don't have any groove, so to speak, to grab onto. And I assume that it's very, very shaykh that he might drop it, in which case liquids might spill onto his body. Therefore, chaser nami us. If some of the water that's in this goblet, even though the goblet is not full to the top, will spill on his body, he's done a rechitza. I'm not at all familiar with this on Yom Kippur. Are you familiar with this? He's not he's not saying that you're not allowed to lift up a cup on Yom Kippur. I mean, I never heard such a thing. Because there's some liquids in the cup and it's a silver cup, he might drop it and spill it on his body. I never heard such a thing. I think he's only talking about a person who's hot, and in order to cool himself off, he's applying this silver goblet to his body. And in such a case, if it's not filled to the top, then we had Rava who said mitztani because the kaspi would cool himself off with the silver cup. If it's chaser, it's not filled to the top, then we're not afraid that it might spill. Now, Rav Ashi is qualifying that heter and the case of Rava when the cup is not, when the goblet is, silver goblet is not full, and he's qualifying that. And even if it's not full, in the case of a silver goblet, it might slip out of his hand. So again, if you ask me why this sounds so foreign and alien to us, whoever heard of such a thing on Yom Kippur, the answer is, I'll ask you a question. Whoever heard of someone who cools off his body by rolling a silver goblet on his body? I mean, I'm sure there are people who do that, but it's not common. At least it's not as common as payros that we discussed earlier. And that's why maybe we don't hear about this. But in truth, if you want to cool off your body by rolling something onto your body and there might be liquids there, enochinami, if it comes to that, then you have issues in halacha and you have to figure out when you're allowed and when you're not allowed. Zeira bar Chama ushpezichnin de Rabbi Ami v'Rav Asi Rabbi Shimon Levi. So this fellow by the name of Zeira, he was the host. He was what you'd call the Baal Hachsanya. And he had a pretty impressive lineup, an all-star lineup of the people who stayed in his inn. He was probably also a Talmud Chacham. Amongst them were Rabbi Ami, Rav Asi, and Rabbi Shimon Levi. The Kula Rabban of the Kisra. Wow. Hava Amar Le, his minhag was when he hosted in his house, Zeira would call upon Rav Yosef Bray, his son, who is Beno to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Bar Aryeh, you are the son of a lion, meaning of a Talmud Chacham, meaning your father's Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. So it's not, Ziri is not talking to Rav Yosef, his son, but rather he's talking to Rav Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. He calls him Bar Aryeh. Ta Emalach, I want to tell you something. Milsa Ma'al Yisadavi Ovid Avu. Apparently, Rabbi Shimon Levi was gone already. So he, the host, Zeiri, wanted to share with Rav Yosef, the orphan of Rabbi Shimon Levi, something very good, Milsa Ma'alisa, that your father, Rabbi Shimon Levi, was Noeg Lassos. Mit Pachas, right, he had a kerchief, Vayelo Berav Yom Kippur V'shoro Osam B'mayim, V'osa Osam Kimin Kalim Neguvim. So on Erev Yom Kippur, he would soak a shmata in water and make it like begadim neguvim. In other words, he would dry it a little bit by squeezing out some of the liquids, again, all on Erev Yom Kippur. But yet, there was some liquid still remaining, a residue of liquid inside the beged, absorbed in the garment. Ulamachar on Yom Kippur, mekanech ba panav yada v'raglav. He would actually wash his face, his hands, and his feet with this mata that he had soaked in water. However, and again, the main punchline here is that he wasn't worried about rechitza. But be'erev Tisha B'Av, shora osam b'mayim, and he didn't even bother squeezing them out on Erev Tisha B'Av, or in Tisha B'Av, like he did on Erev Yom Kippur. So again, on Erev Tisha B'Av, he was more makil and he didn't even bother squeezing out the liquids from this rag. But I'll tell you the truth. He says here, Lo hichmir l'sochta kamo be'erev Yom Kippur, umotzia min hamayim be'erev Tisha B'Av, u'lamochar ma'avira al gabi einav. Oh, I see what happened. In other words, on Tisha B'Av there's an Itzur Rechitza, just like there is on Yom Kippur, but it's not on the same level because Tisha B'Av is a rabbinic institution. So if Rabbi Shimon Levi would soak on Erev Tisha B'Av, he would simply remove this shmata from the receptacle in which it was soaking. And I guess during that time of the year, we're talking about the month of Av, the heat would take away some of the moisture and the rag would begin to dry, but it was still somewhat wet, such that on Tisha B'Av itself, he could cool himself off by wiping his eyes with this rag. All right, then. So we'll try to analyze this a little bit more in depth tomorrow. So I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone. Again, it's good to see everybody back, and everyone should have a great day.